you have read Ruskin Bond. You love the cozy charm, the eerie ghost stories, and the quiet beauty of his world. And now you're looking for more. Well, you are in luck because today we are diving into three more of his books, three really popular ones, one filled with strange and spooky stories, one capturing the beauty of rain and monsoon in India, and one that's essentially a love letter to Landor. We'll go deep into each book, breaking down individual stories because all three are basically collection of short stories. I'll keep them mostly spoiler free, except the one called the Blue Umbrella. So maybe cover your ears when we get there. I'll also structure this video into chapters. So if you're here for a specific story, feel free to jump around. But if you skip the intro, just know that I'll be judging you. I will start with the House of Strange Stories. Ruskin Bond is known for his light horror stories set in India, and he has plenty of short story collections to his name. But here's the sad part. Many books sold as Ruskin Bond stories aren't entirely his. They include stories from other authors, some are classics and some not so much. And that's kind of like disappointing if you pick up a Ruskin Bond book expecting only Ruskin Bond, right? House of Strange Stories is another one of those mixed compilations. It has stories by other writers alongside Bond's own work. That said, it's better than The Perfect Murder, which includes just one Ruskin Bond story. And funny enough, it's not even called the Perfect Murder. Now, as for the theme of the House of Strange Stories, it leans towards horror, but it's not like quite horror. As Ruskin Bond himself explains in the introduction, strange doesn't always mean scary. Claustrophobic settings and threatening situations can make for equally eerie and unsettling tales, and that's what this book has. The compilation includes 21 stories, starting with The House of Strange Stories by Andrew Lang, who was a Scottish poet and novelist. This story follows a group of people sharing ghost stories about eerie incidents in houses they have visited, setting the tone for the entire book. It reminded me of Afterlife Ghost Stories from Goa by Jessica Falero, which has a similar setup, a family sitting together exchanging ghost stories, though in that case the real focus was on the stories themselves, and I didn't particularly enjoy that book. This one though, The House of Strange Stories, I like the short story as well as the book itself, mainly because it's short and it's not even ghost stories, just some eerie occurrences. Next, we get a few stories from Ruskin Bond himself. So story number 2 in this book is From the Primaeval Past. This one is extremely short, just a few pages long, and revolves around a dangerous shadow, perhaps a monster lurking in a pond. It's more of a fleeting, eerie moment than a full-fledged story, but it sets a haunting tone and like that continues throughout the book. Story number 3, Some Hill Station Ghosts. Rather than a traditional story, this is more of a long note about various ghost legends from India's hill stations, with a few short passages detailing them. One interesting highlight, Bond's mention of ghost stories written by Rudyard Kipling in this particular story. Imre's Return, The Phantom's Rickshaw, The Mark of the Beast, and The End of the Passage. Naturally, I added all of these stories to my to-read list. Story number 4, Pret in the House. Yes, finally a Pret story. Most people would read it as like Pret, but Pret. I'm pretty sure it's Pret, okay? It had been ages since I come across like a good story about Prets, and I was particularly excited about this one because Prets are a very specific type of mischievous ghost in Indian folklore. At least that's how Bond describes him, sort of. So Prets, as Ruskin Bond describes, are mischievous ghosts who just give you a very tough time and make your life difficult. Think of them as that one relative who never leaves but also insists on making your life miserable. This story follows a Pret who haunts Ruskin's grandmother and family, and he does so relentlessly that they finally decide to move houses. But plot twist, does the Pret actually let them move? The story is basically a collection of all the weird, hilarious, and frustrating things this Pret does to make their lives difficult. It's more amusing than scary, and honestly, I wouldn't mind watching like a sitcom about this Pret just going about its daily mischief. It would be so fun to watch. Next up, we have A Traveler's Tale, a Ruskin Bond ghost story that is not set in mountains. Now that is rare. If you read enough of his work, you know that most of his stories take place in Mussoorie, Dehradun, or Landour. The man loves the hills. But this one takes place in Gopalpur in Bhubaneswar. The story follows a ghost encounter in this unfamiliar setting, and while it was interesting, it didn't quite like make my favorites list. Maybe it's because I'm so used to the misty mountain backdrop horror that this felt like a little out of place, or maybe the ghost just wasn't spooky enough, or the story just wasn't like just didn't hit the mark. Which, like, for Ruskin Bond's books or like Ruskin Bond's horror, you must know that like most of his stuff is not really scary. He has primarily like written for children, so these are like very light, nice, safe for children books. So you can't really like expect real horror from it, you know. Anyway, story number 6, Chakrata Cat. Yes, another hill station and another eerie tale is what you get in this one. This time we are in Chakrata, where the local legend isn't a ghost or a ghoul, but a cat. And not just any cat. This one has vampire-like qualities. The story is super short, just a quick, eerie snippet about this infamous feline. Did it terrify me? No, it was just okay. Story number 7, a dreadful gurgle. Set in a boarding school, a place already filled with enough nightmares, homework, surprise tests, that one kid who never showers. But Ruskin Bond takes it up a notch with a supernatural twist. This story starts with young Ruskin settling into his bed in his dorm when he realizes there's someone already in his bed. And no, this isn't just a case of a prankster switching beds. This presence is not normal. Something sinister is lurking in that bed, and the tension builds up in the best way possible as you read the story. Personally, I love this one. Boarding school horror always hits different. There's just something about cold dorms, being away from home, and whispers in the night that makes for a perfect ghost story setting, you know. Anyway, story number 8 is The White Pigeon. If there's one thing Ruskin Bond writes about a lot, it's the English couples who stayed back in India post-independence. Their lives, their struggles, their odd little experiences, all of it makes for some really intriguing stories. This one follows an English couple in Dehradun where the wife suddenly falls seriously ill and, well, dies. But here's the creepy part. Before she passes, she says something very weird. She'll return in the form of a white pigeon. That's what she says. And then, well, let's just say something happens, okay? But I won't spoil it for you. If you have made it this far into the video, keep watching the video. And then, like, if you are liking what you're hearing, if you're liking stuff about these stories, then just like pick up the book, okay? All of them are linked down below in the description. Anyway, if you have made this far, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to just like maybe pause and get yourself a cup of tea and then listen through the whole video. So keep watching. Story number 9 is He Who Rides the Tiger. Set in Hooghly, this one shifts away from the usual ghost stories and instead dives into supernatural power. It's about Mobra Ghazi, a fakir with some seriously mystical abilities. Think of him as that one mysterious old man in every Indian village story who seems to know things. And he can do unbelievable things, okay? That's what this tale is about. In this tale, Mobra Ghazi helps a zamindar, that is a landlord, during the time of the Mughal emperors using his supernatural power. So that's what this story is about. Story number 10, The Wind on the Haunted Hill. Yes, back to hill stations and their eerie charm. This one follows a girl who gets stuck in a storm, which, let's be real, is already like really a bad enough situation. But now she has no choice but to take shelter in an abandoned house. The one that, of course, is said to be haunted. Because why not, right? If the title sounds a bit familiar to you, that's because this story also appears in the Whispers of the Rain by Ruskin Bond, another like collection of short stories. We are going to talk about it in this same video, so just stay tuned. But yeah, this story is honestly really good. I liked it. Story number 11, A Job Well Done. This one's written in first person, and while it never actually says who the narrator is, I'm just going to assume it's Ruskin or maybe Rusty. Who else, right? But also, I don't think it's him. If you read the story, you'll know why I said that. It's kind of like these are fictional tales, but still, you know, to imagine what happened in this story, even if it was part fiction, it's just weird. Anyway, the story revolves around Dookie, the family gardener who has been slacking off on covering up a well. And then there's the narrator who absolutely hates his stepfather. Now, that's an already intense setup, but trust me, things get way more interesting. I won't spoil what happens, but let's just say by the end of it, you'll definitely know why I believe this is a fictional tale, or like the narrator may not be rusty, like it's just pure fiction, which it is, but still, Anyway, story number 12 is A Face Under the Pillow. Another Ruskin Bond story. This one will definitely make you think twice before borrowing someone else's pillow or even using one in a hotel, honestly. Story number 13, A Demon for Work. This one felt weirdly familiar to me. Maybe I read it in school, or maybe some old auntie or grandma narrated it to me at some point, because like I knew this story, those stories that just stick with you. This is one of them from my childhood days, okay? It's about a greedy man who finds a demon that must be kept busy at all times. Because if there's ever a moment where the demon has nothing to do, well, let's just say things won't end well for this greedy man. And he very quickly goes out of ideas to keep this demon busy. Lucky for him, he has a wife, and she comes up with a clever way to handle this whole situation. It's a super short read, but a fun one, kind of like nostalgic too. Story 14, The Overcoat. Another Himalayan ghost story. Because if there's one thing Ruskin Bond loves besides the mountains, I think it's writing ghost encounters that he has never actually had in real life. He even admits this in one of his books, No Real Ghost Sightings, yet plenty of spooky stories where he himself, or like his fictional version, is meeting ghosts. Story 15, Eyes of the Cat. This one has a funny backstory. Ruskin Bond originally wrote it for a schoolgirl, and when she later reviewed the book, her feedback was not bad. And she generously gave him 7 out of 10. Honestly, that's the kind of like brutal honesty we need more of. It's a short and decent story, so I guess 7 out of 10 is fair. And it is about the schoolgirl, and then a big cat and a school teacher who isn't nice to this schoolgirl. I've given you enough hints to put together what happens in the story. Like, Ruskin Bond's work is very simple, so there's not a lot of like intense drama or suspense in it. You can figure it out. Do it. Comment down below. Story number 16, The Perfect Murder by Stacy Aumonier. Yes, this is The Perfect Murder. The Perfect Murder compilation talks of, and the whole book, which I have always felt was very, very misleading. Anyway, if you want to hear more about The Perfect Murder as a story, or like that book, I have done a video previously talking about some of the Ruskin Bond books. I think 6 popular Ruskin Bond books that I have read, and this was like my least favorite out of them. I think the story itself, The Perfect Murder, the short story, that is decent. I really like it. It's just about like these bunch of like the not bunch like this like these 2 siblings talking about like the perfect murder, and like then things happen, and then they become the main part of the story and what happens, and also about the perfect murder. Story number 17, another like repeat for me, which is The Red-Headed League by Arthur Conan Doyle. This Sherlock Holmes story also showed up in the Perfect Murder compilation. But hey, it's Arthur Conan Doyle, it's Sherlock Holmes, so of course I read it again, and it's like one of the good ones. And it was still cool even when I reread it, so no complaints here. Story number 18 might actually be my favorite one from this whole compilation, The Lodger by Marie Belloc. I will not pronounce the last name of the author. I've tried, it does not sound good in my accent. So anyway, I read this story like it was like brand new, only to realize halfway through that I had definitely read it before. Yes, another repeat from, I think, one of the Ruskin Bond's many compilations, which often contain other people's stories, but still, this one is a really good one. It's about a mysterious lodger who rents a room from Mr. and Mrs. Bunting, and let's just say his arrival coincides a little too well with a string of disturbing murders in the area. Really sus, right? Definitely an interesting read. Story number 19 is The Duel by Wilkie Collins. Not a Ruskin Bond story again, but still a decent one. This one follows a gentleman who gets mixed up or gets himself mixed up with some very bad company. And as you might have guessed from the title, things eventually escalate into a duel. Story 20, The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. I did not pronounce this correctly, I know. But this one's a classic by Poe. I have not read like enough Edgar Allan Poe like mysteries. I remember like when I was like really young and was just starting out with reading, I got this like really thick book with Edgar Allan Poe stories, or maybe it was a novel, and I tried reading it. The font was really small and the language was too difficult for me at that time when I was just starting to read novels. And since then I have tried to avoid Poe. Okay, but I have been able to read a few like stories by Poe thanks to my like attempts to reading Ruskin Bond, and I end up reading like random compilations, okay, where you get good stories. Stories are fine. It's just the misleading information on the back cover of the book sometimes that irks me. Anyway, this one, honestly, by this point when I was like reading this book, this was the 20th story, okay, and like my brain was kind of an on autopilot. So while this may be a good story, it didn't stick with me much, and like I just did not want to read it again. So like I do not have a like lot of explanation for this story. But if you have read this one, let's talk about it, okay, in the comments. So the last one is The Squaw by Bram Stoker, another big name author, this time the man behind the Dracula. But much like the last one, this story just didn't like leave much of an impression on me. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of reading 21 different stories. I did like take about like 2 weeks to finish this collection, or maybe the story itself wasn't that memorable. Either way, I read it, I finished it, and now I kind of don't remember it. Anyway, final thoughts for this whole compilation, The House of Strange Stories. Look, I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of short stories, and yet somehow I keep ending up reading so many of them, mostly in my ongoing attempt to read a lot of Ruskin Bond's books. Do I regret it? Not really. I think overall these stories were really good, and someone who's looking for short stories and something that touches horror but isn't horror, this could be a good pick. Next up, let's talk about The Whispers of the Rain. Ruskin Bond loves the rain, and if you pick up Whispers of the Rain, you better love it too, because this book is soaked in it. It is a collection of 14 short stories, all revolving around monsoons, drenched landscapes, and the little creatures that come alive when the rain comes. And Ruskin Bond apparently likes them. I do not like them. I, I do not like them. Bugs. No, thank you. Anyway, expect a lot of like lyrical passages dedicated to rain, insects, trees, animals, so much so that at times it feels like you're reading Bond's personal journal rather than a short story collection. The highlight of this book is the Blue Umbrella, the most famous story in the book, which follows a village girl, Bina, and her prized blue umbrella. She actually trades a tiger claw necklace for it in a chance encounter with tourists, only to find that her innocent possession becomes the talk of the village, and not in a good way. The story subtly touches on class differences, as seen when a city woman, unwilling to trade her own belongings, scoffs at Binya's request, saying, "That's different, you know." The irony? It's really not. People being jealous of a girl like Binya owning an umbrella like that, and so on, like all of these themes have been captured really well in this story. And then the rest of the stories in this book, in this compilation, some are good, some are just like there. Many don't follow a traditional storytelling format either. They're more like musings on nature or some entries from Bond's journal. Serious like entries only, which I mentioned, like some of the book feels like that. Okay, if these were not Ruskin Bond stories, honestly I doubt they would like get published traditionally. But his simple yet witty and atmospheric writing carries them and makes even the less eventful ones enjoyable. So if you love Bond's descriptive style and enjoy slow nature focused storytelling, this book is for you. If you prefer more story in your short stories, you might find yourself flipping through the pages waiting for something to happen and nothing happens, so you will get really disappointed. Anyway, now we are going to dive deep into these stories. So story number 1 is The Wind on the Haunted Hill, also featured in The House of the Strange Stories. This one brings back Binya from the Blue Umbrella, but only in a tiny role. The real protagonist here is Usha, an 11-year-old girl who finds herself caught in an eerie situation. The legend: over a century ago, Britishers who lived in this on this hill were constantly getting struck by lightning. Talk about bad real estate choices, or a bad location. Anyway, some say their spirits still haunt that particular area. And on one rainy day, thanks to her own delays, Usha gets stranded on this very hill and has no choice but to take shelter. What happens next? Well, let's just say the place lives up to its reputation. It's a super, super, super short read, just 6 pages, but has that classic spooky but not too scary Ruskin Bond vibe. A fun one, especially for the kids, okay? Number two story is Once Upon a Mountain Time, which is also featured in Ruskin Bond's compilation called Rain in the Mountains, which is another compilation I'm reading. Don't ask me why am I reading so many Ruskin Bond books. Back to back. Not a good idea. Anyway, this one is less of a story and more like a long journal entry from Ruskin Bond's life around 1973. And honestly, that makes it better than a lot of his other short stories because at least something happens here. It's filled with an interesting mix of characters, though whether they are real or just Bond's imagination running wild is anyone's guess. We have Sir Edward, an old man who may not be around much longer. Biju, often found hanging out in trees, yeah. He's Binya's older brother, yes, that Binya from the Blue Umbrella, who's also Usha's friend from The Wind on the Haunted Hill. It's all connected. Prem and Chandra, a young couple. Kailash, a boy stuck in a miserable life with his relative, dreaming of escape. It's actually fascinating in this very piece, like Bond casually mentions that he plans to write about Binya one day, and of course, we all know that he does. Now, let's talk about the real highlight of this story, the writing. Even though not much happens, Bond's little observations about life and nature are just so good. Some of my favorite lines from this book were like, to walk in the rain was fun, to get wet was fun, to fall down was fun, and to get hurt was fun. This just gave me pure childhood nostalgia. And another one was, there is a distinction to be made between aloneness and loneliness. The peanut vendor was seldom alone, but he must have been lonely. That's deep, no? I'll give you another one because I've written them all and I have rehearsed them all to tell you about them, okay? One can sit all day in a tea shop and watch the world go by. Amazing the number of people who actually do this, and not all of them unemployed. Let's just say this together. Tea shops deserve the same love that coffee shops get in modern fiction, okay? It's just that like tea shops in India look different and how we imagine cafes as, but like tea is just better than coffee. That's it. Anyway, overall, this story works because it's a journal entry. Unlike some of Bond's short stories that feel like they exist just because he wrote something. This one feels personal, reflective, full of lovely little moments. So I really liked it. Story number 3 is The Beetle Who Blundered In. It's less of a story and more of a National Geographic special featuring Ruskin Bond as the narrator. I'm just like kidding. But basically, what I mean is this one is all about his life in the Himalayas and how the moment it rains, nature just switches on. Beetles, squirrels, birds, bats, and every tiny creature you would rather not have crawling into your house. If you were hoping for an actual plot, well, you're just out of luck. It's just Bond doing what he does best, romanticizing bugs. Story number 4, A Wayside Tea Shop. A Wayside Tea Shop is basically a love letter to the humble mountain chaiwala. It's just 3 pages long, but in true Ruskin Bond fashion, it makes you want to ditch the city life and go sip tea in the hills. The story, if you can call it that, revolves around a tea shop run by Megh Chand, a man providing weary travelers with warmth, rest, and a much needed cup of chai. And not that like bland chai which chain restaurants serve, like good chai. Story number 5, The Night the Roof Blew Off. And yes, it's literally about that. A mini disaster unfolds as a sudden storm hits and the roof just gives up. Chaos ensues as the author and his family scramble to save whatever they can, his typewriter, books, and other everyday things that suddenly feel precious in the middle of all that madness. It's simple but beautifully written, like most of Ruskin Bond's work. Honestly, this whole anthology is a great reading exercise for kids. Though, let's be real, adults could use a little bit of magic too. But like, if you are looking for picking up a Ruskin Bond book, for your kid and you want your kid to read it, your nephew or niece to read it, The Whispers in the Rain, this book, link down below, okay? Story number 6, The Joy of Water. This one is exactly what it sounds like, just 2 pages of pure appreciation for the monsoon and all the little joys it brings. The rain, the fresh smell of the earth, the way everything comes alive. That's it. That's the story. Simple, but if you love rain, you will love it. Story number 7, Sounds I Like to Hear. This one is all about appreciating the little sounds of nature. The gurgling of a mountain stream, the rhythmic batter of rain on a tin roof, the distant ringing of bells in the hills. Even flowers make their own sounds if you pay close enough attention. The author told me that. I'm not making it up. I think this is a beautiful read for kids because it reminds them to slow down and just listen. Unlike adults, kids don't need a deep meaning or complex plot to enjoy a story. They just take it as is, right? And in a time when screens and constant distractions dominate childhood, books like this, I feel like, are so important. Think about it. Those of us who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s still remember a time before the internet took over. We played outside, we experienced power cuts that forced the whole family to sleep under like the open sky below the stars. We actually knew what the night sounded like. But today's generation, most kids have never slept under the stars without like a wooden or concrete roof over their heads. Unless they are into camping, they may never even know what they're missing. That's why books like these matter. They are pure fiction, but they matter. And your kids or your like little children around you care for, they should be reading this book. These might just be like simple descriptions of nature's sounds, but they have the power to remind these kids growing up at this time of what's out there, to help them imagine it, read about it, and maybe even seek it out for themselves. And for those of your friends that preach non-fiction is the only thing worth reading, ask them which non-fiction can help your kid appreciate and understand the beauty of nature and this simple life. Only a fiction can do that. My lecture aside, story number 8, Untouchable. Didn't really leave much of an impression on me. It's a simple story about a 10-year-old narrator who's alone at home, avoiding going to the neighbor's house where he's supposed to stay. Then there's a sweeper boy, and untouchable by society standards back in that time. But as the rain pours and the nature rages around them, the rigid caste divide seems to blur for a moment. It's an average story, not particularly gripping, but it does touch on how nature has a way of stripping away human made barriers, even if just temporarily. Honestly, I love the slowness of Ruskin Bond stories. One story can just be about several insects coming into your house during monsoon, and I don't even like insects, but I like reading that story. Or another story can be about hanging out at a tea shop in the middle of nowhere. Most of the time, it's just Ruskin Bond experiencing these little moments, but he lets you live those moments through his writing. Now, to some, that might feel like pointless. Like, why am I reading about a beetle blundering in? But for others, for people who have felt the anxiety and overwhelm of living a fast paced, competitive life in metro cities, this kind of storytelling is like a much needed medicine. A medicine with no side effects. Well, maybe one. You might end up reading more and more books. For me, I have felt that overwhelm living in Delhi, working in Toronto, and even now when I'm like juggling work, ambition, and competition, I feel that overwhelm. And I'm just grateful that there are books and authors like Ruskin Bond who remind me to slow down, breathe, and just like be. Anyway, story number 9, A Long Walk for Bina. One of the longest stories in this collection. Most are just like short passages or journal like musings, but this one actually has a bit more of a plot. It follows 3 kids, Bina, Sonu, and Prakash, who have to walk to another village for school and crossing a stream or a tavern on the way. There are other characters too, teachers, school rivalries, and the looming threat of a leopard that has been displayed due to a nearby dam construction. The story subtly comments on how humans destroy animal habitats and then complain about the dangers these animals pose. Prakash is an interesting character in this story, obsessed with his watch in the beginning, always checking the time, but by the end, he learns to let go a little and play the flute instead. Maybe Prakash is the modern day kid obsessed with their phone or iPad. And then there's Mr. Money, an older teacher who loves gardening, first potatoes, then dahlias, but he's constantly battling porcupines that keep ruining his crops. Miss Ramola, the newer teacher, brings some like fresh dynamics to the school and to the story. The story starts with a rumor that Mr. Money might have been taken by the leopard, adding a bit of like suspense. But at its heart, this is another simple, nature appreciating mountain tale, something that feels almost rare in literature today. Who else is writing stories like this? I can't think of anybody. Simple, quiet narratives about everyday mountain life. They are well written, but as stories, they are also like, I would say, I would accept kind of like average. Ruskin Bond, I would say just like he's an acquired taste, kind of like avocados, and I love avocados. Story number 10, When the Monsoon Breaks. Set in Meerut, India, this is less of a story and more of like a long descriptive passage about the monsoon, how nature reacts to it, how the patterns shift with the arrival of rain. There's no like real plot, just observations on the sights, sounds, and movements of birds, insects, and trees when the monsoon breaks. It's like classic Ruskin Bond, slow, immersive, and all about capturing a mood rather than telling a structured, suspenseful story. Story number 11, Where Rivers Meet, a short 5-page tale set in the small town of Nand Prayag, where two rivers converge. It carries like a touch of history, blending the past and the present in Bond's signature reflective style. The story isn't like driven by a plot, but rather by the sense of the place. Story number 12, Wilson's Bridge. This is more of a local like legend wrapped in a ghost story. I don't know for sure if there really is the local legend or if it's like all fictional. Okay, but the tale revolves around Wilson and Gulabo. I think Gulabi. Okay, something like that. A woman whose heartbreak leads to tragedy. When she discovers her husband's affair, her simple, fragile soul cannot bear the betrayal, and she takes her own life. And now her presence sort of like lingers around the Wilson's Bridge, turning it into a place, um, you know, sort of like a haunted place. It's kind of a melancholic, eerie story that is amidst all of these like more vibrant stories about the monsoon. Okay, and also like I think in this compilation, this particular one, this is one of the few stories that lean into the supernatural or paranormal stuff. Story number 13, The Crooked Tree. It's a Rusty story, meaning it's either Ruskin Bond himself or some imagined version of him. And like if you don't know about Rusty, like if you are not familiar with like all the works of Ruskin Bond, so I should tell you like Rusty is like one character that appears in the very first book Ruskin Bond wrote, and he has written I think 7, 8, or maybe more books about Rusty. I do have a video I think about like some books featuring Rusty. Okay, so he's just like this very famous character in the fictional world in India. So that's who Rusty is. That's why I said it's a Rusty story. So here in this story, Rusty sort of like dreams of becoming a writer while living in a tiny room in Shahganj, and he's struggling to write his first book. This is that time. And he befriends Kamal, a poor orphaned boy determined to pass his exams and build a better life. The story captures the aspiration of youth, this uncertainty of future, and the quiet companionship of two dreamers. You must pass your exams or go to college, but do not feel that if you fail, you will be able to do nothing. I loved this line that Ruskin Bond has included in this particular story. Anyway, it's a story about hope, struggle, and the beauty of small town friendships. And then we have story number 14, The Blue Umbrella, the most famous of them all. The Blue Umbrella is simple yet profound story about desire, envy, and kindness. Bina, a young girl, comes to own a beautiful blue umbrella that becomes the envy of the entire village, especially Ram Bharosa, the shopkeeper. As his longing for the umbrella grows, Ram Bharosa goes with a plan to steal it from her. But here's the part people often forget: the umbrella fades over time. It gets torn, stitched up by Binya's mother, losing some of its initial charm. Yet, in an act of grace and generosity, in the end, and yes, this is a spoiler, close your ears if you don't want to hear it, Binya willingly offers the umbrella to Ram Bharosa herself. A classic Ruskin Bond story, small in scale yet rich in human emotions. And honestly, like this is the last story and my final review of the book. I like the book a lot. I definitely like recommend it for children. But it's also like meh, because like I told you, like most of the stories are like journal entries. At one point I was just like, cannot read more about beetles or like insects. I don't like them that much. Okay, but for children, it's amazing. The best thing about Ruskin Bond's writing is the slowness. One story can literally just be about bugs coming inside the house during monsoon or hanging out at a random like tea shop in the mountains, and somehow it still works. It's calming, especially if you ever like have felt the overwhelm of a fast-paced life. His books feel like a breather, a way to just exist in the moment and appreciate small things. No plot twist, no drama, just vibes. But also, let's be real, some of these are just like journal entries. There's barely a story sometimes, and I couldn't help but notice that a lot of these have been published before in different collections. Like, am I buying a new book or just getting a remix of old stories every time I decide to pick up a Ruskin Bond book? So that honestly kind of feels a little sneaky to me. I don't know like how much part is played by the author and how much part is played by the publisher in this, but like sneaky, not appreciated. Overall, Whispers of the Rain is a good, peaceful read, great for kids since they don't need deep meanings or complex plots to enjoy a book. If you like slow, reflective writing and about nature, mountain life, you'll like it. But if you're looking for actual plots or something fresh, you might feel a little underwhelmed. Like I said, Ruskin Bond is an acquired taste, kind of like avocados. Now, the third and final book in this video is Landour Days. Landour Days is basically a year from Ruskin Bond's journal. It starts in April and ends in March of next year, taking you through 4 Indian seasons and a full cycle of nature. The months act as chapters, so you move through the year with him. The entries, classic Ruskin Bond, walks, trees, birds, mountains. His love for nature is everywhere in this book. But beyond that, there's like a lot of writer talk, sayings, observations, the ups and downs of the writing life. And here's what really got me and like sort of bothered me about this part is he's already an established author at this point, okay, but he still writes from a place of humility and not much money. Like how Ruskin Bond is one of the India's most successful authors. Shouldn't that mean he's one of the richest too? Where's the disconnect? Am I miscalculating something here? Because honestly, it was kind of baffling for me to read like India's most popular and most loved author talking about like money struggles all the time. Anyway, let's dive deeper into the chapters. Let's start with April. Funny enough, in the April entries, Ruskin Bond talks about how people write too small and how that's bad for your eyes. And yet, I had to return The Night Train at Duel and other stories because the font was unbearably small. The author's book, okay? Some people told me it must be a pirated copy, but I bought it from Amazon's official seller, so I doubt it. And this isn't the first time I'm struggling with the font, in a Ruskin Bond book. I'm struggling through Rain in the Mountains right now, another Bond book with tiny font that's making my reading experience straight up miserable. At this point, I'm so sick of reading that book, and honestly, I think it has more to do with the font than the content itself, and I might just like DNF it. I have like read a large part of it because I wanted to include it in this video, and then I decided not to because I just could not bear to read that book. It's going to take me months. And you're expecting, like most of these books are written for children, you are expecting to give that font to a child. I would not do that to myself as a child. Something to think about. Anyway, April's entry is mostly about handwriting, writing habits, and his own preferences on how he writes his books. May's entries mostly focus on writers in Mussoorie. When Ruskin Bond first moved there, he hadn't expected to be the only writer in the area. He talks about Dehradun's literary scene and then goes on to name a few authors who have lived in Mussoorie over time. For those who don't know, Ruskin Bond has written extensively about Dehradun and Mussoorie. A lot of his stories are set here because this is where he has lived his whole life. Right now, he pretty much his whole life, okay? Right now, he lives in Landour, which if you're traveling up from the plains, goes like this. Dehradun, Mussoorie, and then Landour. And honestly, Landour becoming famous, a huge part of that credit goes to Ruskin Bond himself. That's just what I think. Now, he does name drop quite a few people, Hugh Cancer, Stephen Alter, Vince Chamberlain, Dhiren Bhagat, Victor Banerjee, and so on. I personally hadn't heard most of these names and authors, so it was nice to just learn about these writers through the book. That being said, not every month is about one fixed subject. These are still like journal entries. So in the same month, you also get passages about compulsive daily walkers and even hypochondriacs. Jones' entries capture a typical Landour, Mussoorie morning. No water, no electricity, the telephone is out of order, and the usual. You read a lot about Landour in Landour Days, of course. How the place isn't too busy, how most houses stay abandoned for most of the year. how not many people live there, but is it still the same? That's what I wonder. I have seen some like content online talking about how Landor is busier than it should be. So I genuinely wonder if Ruskin's Landor still exists. And now June also has some short writing advice sprinkled in. But if you're really looking for writing advice from Ruskin Bond, check out How to Be a Writer. I have actually reviewed that book in my last video about Ruskin Bond, which I'll link down below in the description. So yeah, check it out. Before the summer ends and monsoon arrives, Ruskin talks at length about birds. And you know, this was my third Ruskin Bond book in a row about atmosphere, trees, and birds, back to back. And oh boy, I wish I hadn't read them back to back. I so wish that. Like reading one or two Ruskin Bond books a year, great. But three or four in a row, I do not recommend that to anybody. Please do not do this to yourself. July, monsoon. Monsoon, insects, crickets, cicadas, I don't know how to pronounce that, okay? And then leopards, of course. One thing about Ruskin Bond, when he writes about monsoon, the corrugated tin roof always makes an appearance, most of the times, okay? There's a story in Whispers of the Rain where his roof starts leaking, and he also talks about this tin roof and the sound of the rain on this roof in the rain in the mountains. So yeah, I think I have developed a weird affinity for corrugated tin roofs now, thanks to Ruskin Bond. July's entries also like sort of speak about books in 1940s India, how they were like a scarce commodity in small towns, hardly any libraries and good bookshops. Only in the big cities you could find like bookshops, libraries, and books. And honestly, in 2025, isn't that still true? Sadly, like I doubt small town India has many libraries still, and libraries with good enough collection and good books. And finding a bookstore that sells anything beyond textbooks and exam prep guides is still tough unless you are in a major city. Sure, Amazon and Flipkart have like made books more accessible, but I wonder when we'll reach a point where every Indian city has a thriving book culture. I am looking forward to that point. I think it's gonna come soon. Anyway, Ruskin talks about some of his favorite books and how they inspired him to be a writer. After reading David Copperfield, he decided it would be a fine thing to become a writer, which relatable. Oh, and Hotel Savoy, he writes about it a lot in this book and in this, like I think the whole book, not just in this story. But overall, a huge chunk of Landour Days is about writing and being an author, which is why I really enjoyed it. He even shares some wild author versus critic drama, which honestly peak entertainment. Okay. August, all about plants and their medicinal benefits. Walnuts for brain health, apples for the heart, grapes for piles. Now, I don't know how much of this book is backed by science today, but honestly, it's always fascinating to read about like old school remedies and what people believed back in the day. Also, it's kind of funny how everyone's grandmother probably still swears by some version of this, like drink haldi doodh, it will fix everything. Anyway, in September, we have entries on hypochondriacs again and some mentions of Hotel Savoy and then a few ghost stories or encounters. Ruskin Bond loves writing about ghosts, but not in a like a horror movie kind of way, like I told you. It's always this soft, eerie atmosphere, never outright terrifying, just unsettling enough to make you wonder. You know, it's not about making you scared, it's about making you feel something that maybe it's real, maybe it's not. That kind of storytelling, you know, classic Ruskin Bond. October. It is dedicated to railway stations. Ruskin Bond often speaks of Rudyard Kipling and his fascination with India. And in this entry, he talks about Kipling's 1901 novel Kim. But mostly, it's all about trains, what he prefers, what he doesn't, and how railway stations are the perfect place to find inspiration for stories. Honestly, I definitely agree with this. I have like one time I was traveling. It has been a long time since I traveled in train. I want to do that again, but I sort of like sat across this woman, and I tell you guys, she is gonna be in one of my books, okay? Not in the one that I'm writing right now, but this woman has a story, and in some silent way, that story was communicated to me, okay? And I'm gonna write about it one day. Because like railway stations and those journeys are just that kind of like powerhouse for giving you inspiration, or where you can draw inspiration from. Anyway, Ruskin Bond also reminisces about the time his first book was coming out 45 years before this journal entry, this year, was written. He talks about trying to get his hands on the Illustrated Weekly of India, the magazine where his novel was serialized in India before the book was published in England. Honestly, one of the biggest reasons I enjoyed reading this was how it just let me travel back in time to experience the old days without the usual pain and suffering that historical fiction is filled with. I do appreciate historical fiction and I do want to read more of it, but sometimes you just want to live in a sort of a fictional world that's just fiction, devoid of all the heaviness and the pain. Anyway, November brings winter. In November, Ruskin Bond writes about car horns, romance, and all that stuff. It's funny how, despite living in a quiet hill town, car horns still manage to make it into his journal entries. And of course, this happens while he's traveling. Yeah. Anyway, December and January. December is all about rivers and cemeteries. And finally, January brings in the charm of old landlord houses, which I loved reading about them. There's just something so fascinating about homes that have stood the test of time. Ruskin writes about them in such a warmth that you can almost picture yourself strolling through the narrow lanes of Landor, admiring the names of these houses that you read in this book. Overall, I really enjoyed Landor Days, probably more than The Whispers of the Rain. This one just felt more immersive, like stepping into Ruskin Bond's life as a writer. It has got that old world charm, taking you back in time without the usual pain and suffering that historical fiction brings. Sometimes you just want to read about the past without it being heartbreaking. What I really liked was how much of this book is about writing, his struggles, his inspirations, his thoughts on books, critics, publishing, and all that. And then, of course, there's all the usual Ruskin Bond stuff: nature, season, trees, birds, small town life. But the best parts for me were his reflections on being a writer and the literary history of Mussoorie. The way he talks about old railway stations, libraries, and bookshops, it's just nostalgic in the best way. That said, I know this won't be for everyone. If you are not already into Ruskin Bond, I can see how this might not hold your attention at all. But if you like his writing and want to get a real glimpse into his world, this book is so worth it. So yeah, that wraps up my thoughts on these three Ruskin Bond books: The House of Strange Stories, Whispers of the Rain, and Landor Days. Each of them had its own charm, but Landor Days was my favorite, definitely, amongst these three. And just because of how much it dives into writing and old world nostalgia. Reading multiple Ruskin Bond books, again, I'll say that back to back, reading these was an experience. I love his writing, but I also realized that spacing them out is probably a better idea unless you really want to read about trees, birds, misty hills, endlessly on repeat. Anyway, let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of these three books, which one, or if you haven't read it, which one of these sounded uh, most interesting to you, and if you if you have already read way too many Ruskin Bond books like I just did, tell me, did you survive? And also, if you have more recommendations, I'm still looking for reading at least one more. There's that one book that I'm painfully going through, and I think it's and then there's one more book I want to read this year. So if you have recommendations for me, drop them right below in the comments right now. Thanks for watching this video. This is Manvi signing off. I'll be back with another video very soon.